The crystalline walls of the Citadel of Seven Moons caught Earth's distant sunlight, casting prismatic patterns across General Marcus Chen's face as he knelt before the Zarkak's high command. His once pristine uniform bore carefully crafted wrinkles, metals deliberately tarnished to suggest defeat. The ceremonial chains binding his wrists chimed softly against the polished floor, a sound that would have echoed ominously if not for the constant low hum of the fortress's defense systems. High Commander Vexthra towered over him, 4 golden eyes gleaming with satisfaction. The alien's ceremonial armor plates shifted with an almost musical quality as he circled the captured human. "The great General Chen," he announced to the assembled council, his translator rendering his clicks and whistles into crisp English. "The strategic genius who evaded us for 3 years, finally brought low." Chen kept his head bowed, hiding the slight curve of his lips. 3 years. 3 years of carefully orchestrated battles, strategic retreats, and calculated losses. Each defeat had been a brushstroke in a masterpiece of misdirection, leading to this precise moment. The council chamber itself proved everything his intelligence reports had suggested. The Zarkak's obsession with hierarchy manifested in the very architecture, each council member seated according to rank, their perches arranged in perfect geometric patterns. Even their colors held meaning. The deep blues of the military caste contrasting with the silver white of the diplomatic corps. Every detail screamed of a society bound by rules, traditions, and rigid protocols. "You will be treated according to your rank," Diplomatic Minister Ksai announced, her delicate translator producing more melodious tones. "The Zarkak's empire honors worthy opponents." She gestured to the guards. "Escort the general to the high security wing. Maximum courtesy protocols, befitting a captured flag officer." Chen allowed himself to be lifted to his feet, noting how the guards touched him with almost reverential care despite his status as a prisoner. The Zarkak's complex honor system would work to his advantage. A lesser race might have thrown him in a dark hole, but these beings would follow their protocols to the letter, protocols that would give him exactly the access he needed. As they led him from the chamber, Chen mentally reviewed the path, counting intersections and noting guard positions. The Citadel's layout confirmed the architectural plans his team had pieced together. More importantly, he observed how military caste members and diplomatic corps representatives interacted in the corridors, the subtle tensions, the almost imperceptible jockeying for position. His cell, when they reached it, was exactly as expected: clean, sophisticated, and equipped with basic comforts appropriate for his rank. The guards removed his chains with ceremonial precision, each movement part of a ritual thousands of years old. Chen caught the younger guard stealing glances at him, curiosity warring with training. "Thank you for your courtesy," Chen said softly, using the formal tones his linguistic training had emphasized. The guards straightened, surprised by his knowledge of their etiquette. He bowed precisely 11 degrees, the exact angle used to show respect to those of their particular rank. The older guard's antenna twitched with interest. The younger one actually took half a step forward before catching himself. Chen had just violated their expectations in the subtlest way possible. A prisoner shouldn't know such cultural details. That small mystery would gnaw at them, and they would talk. Word would spread. As the energy field hummed to life across his cell entrance, Chen settled onto the provided meditation mat. Through the crystalline walls, he could see 3 of the fortress's 7 moons hanging in the purple sky. Somewhere up there, humanity's ships were already moving into position, though the Zarkak's sensors wouldn't detect them for months. Chen closed his eyes and began his meditation. The first pieces were in place. Soon, he would begin the real work, dismantling an empire not through force or violence, but through careful manipulation of their own cultural machinery. They thought they had captured a general. In truth, they had invited a master psychologist into the heart of their civilization. The game was about to begin. General Chen's cell offered an unexpected advantage. Its crystalline walls acted as acoustic lenses, carrying snippets of conversation from the corridors beyond. He spent the first week in perfect silence, noting how the Zarkak's guards shifted their weight when anxious, how their antennae twitched when intrigued, and most importantly, how their rigid social hierarchy created invisible walls between ranks. The younger guard, Tileri, always walked 3 steps behind his superior, Kaseth. When addressing higher ranks, Tileri's secondary arms folded in a specific pattern that spoke of generations of ingrained submission. Chen noted how Kaseth's carapace plates darkened slightly whenever Senior Commander Vexthra passed by, a physiological response to stress that the Zarkaks themselves seemed unaware of. On the 8th day, when Tileri brought his morning nutrition cube, Chen spoke. "Your formation training shows remarkable discipline," he observed casually, using the exact formal tones reserved for addressing members of the warrior subcaste. The 7th dynasty would have approved. Tileri froze, mandibles clicking in surprise. "You know of the 7th dynasty's military protocols?" Chen allowed himself a small smile. "I find your species' history fascinating. The Battle of Crimson Moons, for instance, the way General Cathar modified traditional diamond formations to account for gravitational fluctuations was brilliant." The guard's antennae quivered with barely contained excitement. Like most younger Zarkaks, Tileri had been raised on stories of past military glories, but had never heard them analyzed by an outsider. "You've studied our tactical histories. One must understand history to understand the present," Chen replied, carefully using a phrase from ancient Zarkak's philosophy. He noted how Tileri's posture shifted, the subtle straightening of his spine plates indicating pride in their shared knowledge. The next day, both guards lingered after delivering his meal. Kaseth, despite his initial resistance, found himself drawn into a discussion about the evolution of Zarkak's battle formations. Chen asked questions that made them think, gently highlighting connections they'd never considered. He watched their reactions carefully, noting how their rigid thinking struggled with new perspectives. By the 2nd week, word had spread through the guard rotation. Chen could track the ripples of his influence through the changing patterns of conversation in the corridors. Junior officers began taking slightly longer routes past his cell, hoping to catch fragments of the discussions that now regularly occurred there. He gave them what they wanted, carefully measured insights into human military thinking, each revelation calculated to intrigue rather than threaten. When discussing Earth's adaptive strategy, he emphasized elements that would resonate with their own traditions while planting seeds of doubt about their current tactical doctrine. "Fascinating," remarked Senior Tactical Advisor Jakara, who had found an excuse to inspect his cell personally. "You suggest that flexibility can be a form of discipline." Chen bowed his head modestly. "Your own 11th dynasty proved this. The reforms of Empress Tileri demonstrated how adaptation could strengthen traditional structures rather than weaken them." The advisor's carapace flushed with the deep blue of intellectual excitement. Here was a prisoner who understood their history, respected their traditions, and yet suggested new ways of thinking about them. It was intoxicating to their knowledge-hungry society. What none of them realized was how carefully Chen chose each historical reference, each philosophical concept. Every discussion was a thread in a larger web designed to create specific resonances and dissonances within their social structure. When Administrator Kittle complained about military interference in diplomatic protocols, Chen merely mentioned how Earth's combined arms doctrine balanced different service branches. The administrator left with new ideas about administrative authority, ideas that would cause precisely the kind of bureaucratic friction Chen's plan required. From his cell, he watched the subtle shift in dynamics. Military officers began questioning diplomatic decisions more openly. Diplomatic staff started demanding greater oversight of military operations. Each group cited principles they'd learned from their discussions with the helpful human prisoner, never realizing they were being guided toward inevitable conflict. The Zarkax's own dedication to hierarchy and protocol was becoming their weakness. Like a master acupuncturist, Chen was finding the pressure points in their social structure. Each carefully placed word was a needle, sending ripples of disruption through their rigid systems. The wet was beginning to take shape. 3 weeks into his imprisonment, General Chen's influence spread through the citadel like perfume through still air. His cell had become an unofficial salon, with a steady stream of visitors seeking his insights. Each conversation was a delicate dance of psychology and calculated revelation, though none of his visitors recognized the steps. Today's guest was particularly significant. Junior Diplomatic Minister Ilsai, her silver-white carapace gleaming with the iridescent markings of the ascendant diplomatic caste. She perched on the visitor's seat, all 4 hands clasped in a gesture of scholarly interest. "Our analysts are puzzled by human trade negotiations," she admitted, her translator rendering her clicks into melodious tones. "Your patterns seem chaotic." Chen smiled, noting how her antennae twitched with embarrassment at the admission of ignorance. "Perhaps I can offer a perspective. Would you share a specific example?" Ilsai projected a holographic document. "Trade negotiations from the Perseus sector." Chen leaned forward, maintaining the perfect degree of professional interest that would appeal to a Zarkak's diplomat's sense of propriety. "Ah," he said, gesturing to a particular clause. "Notice how the human negotiators conceded on shipping routes, but held firm on communication protocols. To understand this, one must consider Earth's historical development of space lanes." For the next hour, Chen wove a masterful explanation that connected human trading practices to Zarkak's philosophical principles. He watched Ilsai's color patterns shift from skepticism to excitement as she recognized familiar patterns in seemingly alien behavior. "This is extraordinary," she breathed. "The military caste has been completely misinterpreting human commercial expansion. They've been treating it as aggressive territoriality, when it's actually a natural extension of cultural exchange principles," Chen finished, using a phrase from classical Zarkak's literature. "Much like your own Third Dynasty's approach to cultural assimilation." Ilsai's carapace flushed with intellectual pleasure. She left with a datapad full of notes and a head full of ideas that would inevitably conflict with military caste doctrine. Chen had given her powerful ammunition for the ongoing debate about human intentions, though she didn't realize she was being armed. Later that afternoon, Security Commander Kfor arrived, ostensibly to review containment protocols. His dark blue carapace bore the distinctive scaring of frontier service. "Your insights about human defensive doctrine have been illuminating," Kfor admitted, mandibles clicking thoughtfully. "But surely you understand my need to verify certain details." Chen nodded appreciatively. "Diligence honors your rank," he replied, using the formal phrasing that would resonate with a security officer. "What aspects trouble you?" As Kfor outlined his concerns about human military deployments, Chen provided answers that were perfectly truthful yet strategically incomplete. Each explanation contained seeds of doubt about the diplomatic caste's handling of human relations. "Consider the Centauri incident," Chen suggested. "Your diplomatic course interpreted our fleet movements as aggressive posturing. In reality, we were responding to the same piracy concerns your own patrols had identified. The question is, why wasn't this intelligence shared between your departments?" Kvor's antennae stiffened as the implications sank in. Chen had just suggested a significant intelligence failure while simultaneously highlighting the common ground between human and Zarkak's military thinking. The web of influence grew more complex with each passing day. Junior officers who'd attended Chen's impromptu lectures began advancing in rank, their new perspectives earning them favorable attention. Diplomatic staff who'd consulted him on human customs found themselves promoted to more sensitive negotiations. None of them realized they were becoming vectors, spreading new ideas through the rigid hierarchy of the Citadel. Ideas that would interact in precisely the ways Chen had calculated, creating pressure points in the perfect machine of Zarkak society. From his cell, Chen tracked the ripples of his influence. He noted how military caste members now hesitated fractionally when passing diplomatic corps staff in the corridors. He observed the subtle changes in posture when different departments interacted, the barely perceptible increase in tension. The whispers were becoming conversations. Soon, Those conversations would become debates, and the debates would expose the fault lines he'd been so carefully mapping. The game was proceeding exactly as planned. The great dining hall of the Citadel of Seven Moons hummed with tension. General Chen, now granted limited privileges due to his cooperative nature, sat at a small table in the corner, sipping ceremonial Katheri tea. His position offered a perfect view of the growing divide between the military and diplomatic castes, who now occupied opposite sides of the hall. Through the crystalline walls, 3 of the fortress's moons hung in perfect alignment, a rare sight that would once have inspired unity among the Zarkaks. Today, however, the assembled officials barely noticed, too absorbed in their internal politics. Senior diplomatic minister Tor approached his table, her silver-white carapace adorned with newly added rank insignia. "General," she said, her translator pitched low, "might I seek your perspective on a sensitive matter?" Chen gestured to the empty seat with exactly the right degree of formal deference. "Your presence honors me, Minister." Sora's antennae twitched with barely contained agitation. "Your insights about human diplomatic protocols have proven invaluable. However, certain elements within the military caste suggest we are being too accommodating." "An interesting perspective," Chen replied, carefully maintaining a neutral tone. "Perhaps they fear that understanding leads to weakness." "Precisely." Sora's color patterns shifted with excitement. "Yet according to the texts you shared about Earth's historical development, diplomatic engagement often prevented unnecessary conflicts." Chen nodded thoughtfully, watching military commander Kfor at a distant table. The commander's antennae were rigid with disapproval as he observed their conversation. "In human history, we found that transparency between military and diplomatic functions was crucial, each supporting the other, like the dual moons of your home world." Sora's carapace flushed with the deep purple of revelation. Yes. Perhaps if the military caste shared more of their intelligence data, we could better structure our diplomatic initiatives. As she hurried away, Chen hid his satisfaction behind his teacup. The seeds he planted were bearing fruit. Tomorrow, the diplomatic corps would formally request access to military intelligence briefings, citing human diplomatic precedents. The military caste would resist, of course, seeing it as an infringement on their traditional autonomy. Later that afternoon, in the cultural archives where he'd been granted research privileges, Chen received another visitor. Sub-Commander Ultari, his blue carapace bearing fresh command insignia, approached with carefully measured steps. "General," Ultari began, his translator struggling to convey his underlying anxiety, "your analysis of human military adaptability has raised concerns among my colleagues." Chen looked up from his data terminal, where he'd been reviewing Zarkak's historical documents. "Concerns often arise when examining different strategic philosophies," he offered diplomatically. "The diplomatic caste speaks of peace initiatives, yet our analysts note increased human fleet movements in the Perseus sector." Ultari's secondary arms twitched in agitation. They claimed to understand human intentions, but refused to share their intelligence sources. "A complex situation," Chen mused. "In human military structure, we found that information bottlenecks often led to strategic vulnerabilities. Your own third dynasty fell partly due to similar communication failures between castes, did it not?" Ultari's antennae went rigid with shock. The fall of the third dynasty was a sensitive topic, rarely discussed. Yet Chen had just connected it to current political tensions with devastating precision. Throughout the Citadel, similar conversations multiplied like fractals. Each case now viewed the other with growing suspicion, citing principles and precedents that Chen had carefully seeded through dozens of seemingly innocent discussions. In the officers' recreation area, military caste members huddled in tense groups, discussing the diplomatic corps' unprecedented demands for oversight. In the administrative sectors, diplomatic staff exchanged worried whispers about military operations conducted without their knowledge. Chen moved through it all like a shadow, each carefully chosen word and historical reference adding to the growing pressure. The Zarkaks' own dedication to protocol and tradition was becoming a weapon against them, as each caste used their rigid social rules to justify increasingly antagonistic positions. The cracks in their perfect society were beginning to show, and soon those cracks would become chasms. General Chen's new quarters in the administrative wing of the Citadel reflected his elevated status. The crystalline walls now shifted to his preferred opacity levels, and a small balcony offered a commanding view of the perpetual storms that swirled around the fortress's upper levels. But more valuable than any comfort was his position at the intersection of the military and diplomatic sectors, a perfect observation post for the chaos he'd orchestrated. Today's cultural exchange session drew an unprecedented mix of high-ranking officials. Sub-Commander Kavor and Diplomatic Minister Sora sat at opposite ends of the conference table, their respective staffs maintaining rigid separation. The tension in the room felt thick enough to cut with a ceremonial blade. "Your insights into human organizational structure have been invaluable," Sora began, her translator barely masking her underlying smugness. "Perhaps you could elaborate on your species' approach to departmental oversight." Chen noticed how Kavor's carapace darkened at the word oversight. "Perfect. An interesting topic," he replied, maintaining his carefully crafted persona of scholarly detachment. Humans found that different perspectives often revealed blind spots in organizational thinking. He brought up a holographic display of Earth's military command structure, overlaid with diplomatic channels. "Consider how our diplomatic corps maintains awareness of military operations that might affect negotiations. This prevented many potential incidents during our early expansion period." Kavor's antennae twitched irritably. "And did your military simply accept this civilian interference?" "They recognized it as coordination rather than interference," Chen corrected gently, using a subtle harmonics pattern that the Zarkax associated with ancestral wisdom. "Much like how your own fourth dynasty balanced military autonomy with diplomatic necessity." The reference to their history sparked immediate debate. Chen watched as both sides seized on different aspects of his explanation, each finding support for their own position. Sora cited human diplomatic protocols to justify increased oversight of military operations. Kavor referenced Earth's chain of command to argue for maintained autonomy. Neither realized they were playing exactly the roles Chen had scripted for them. Later, in a private consultation, High Administrator Lil Sai sought Chen's advice on implementing new security protocols. "The military caste resists our proposed changes," she complained, her silver-white carapace showing patches of stress discoloration. "Change often faces resistance," Chen observed, pouring her a cup of Ktheri tea with perfect ceremonial precision. "However, your own history suggests interesting solutions. The reforms of Empress Terra faced similar challenges, did they not?" Lisey's antennae perked up with interest. "The Reformation period. But that was a time of significant social upheaval. And ultimately, strengthening," Chen added smoothly. "Sometimes systems must bend to avoid breaking." She left with a datapad full of historical references and reform proposals, each carefully selected to provoke maximum resistance from the military caste. Chen had just armed her with arguments that would strike at the very foundation of traditional Zarkax military autonomy. Through his cultural exchange sessions, Chen wove a web of competing influences. He introduced human concepts of checks and balances, watching as the Zarkax attempted to apply them to their rigid hierarchy with predictably disastrous results. Their society, based on absolute loyalty to one's superior, began to fracture under the weight of questioning minds. The evening storm cast dramatic shadows through the crystalline walls as Chen reviewed the day's progress. In the corridors outside, he could hear heated discussions between members of different castes. The diplomatic corps now demanded access to military planning sessions, citing human protocols as precedent. The military caste responded by questioning diplomatic security clearances, using Earth's classification systems as justification. Each side believed they were adopting sophisticated human organizational principles. None recognized how these foreign concepts were acting as acid on the bonds of their society, dissolving millennia of tradition and trust. Chen smiled as he watched lightning play across the fortress's energy shields. His honey trap had worked perfectly. The Zarkax's own hunger for knowledge and improvement had led them to eagerly adopt the very ideas that would unravel their power structure. 6 perfect moons aligned outside the Citadel's crystalline walls, a rare celestial event that should have inspired celebration among the Zarkax. Instead, the fortress buzzed with accusations and counter-accusations. General Chen observed the mounting chaos from his private balcony, noting how even the ceremonial guard rotations had become tense affairs of divided loyalties. His morning meditation was interrupted by an urgent message from High Administrator Lasai. Her usually immaculate silver-white carapace showed distinct stress patterns as she materialized in his room's holographic communication field. "General, I require your insights immediately," she began, her translator struggling to maintain diplomatic frequencies through her agitation. "We've discovered something disturbing in the military caste's communication protocols." Chen arranged his features into a mask of professional concern. "How may I assist, Administrator?" "Our analysis of their transmission patterns, using the human cryptographic principles you shared, suggests they're operating a separate command network outside official channels. The implications would be quite serious." Chen finished smoothly, given the 7th Dynasty's laws regarding unified command structure. Lasai's antennae quivered with barely suppressed excitement. "Precisely. But when we attempted to access their security protocols for verification, Sub-Commander Kovor cited human military classification standards to deny our request." Chen allowed himself a thoughtful pause. An interesting application of the principles, though perhaps not entirely in keeping with their original context. The administrator's color patterns shifted to deep indigo, the Zarkax's equivalent of righteous indignation. She departed with a flurry of formal phrases, already composing a formal protest to the High Command. Later that afternoon, Chen received an equally urgent visit from military strategist Carr. The officer's blue carapace bore the distinctive markings of the elite planning division. The recent stress had dulled their usual luster. "General, your expertise is required," Takar began, mandibles clicking anxiously. "We've intercepted diplomatic transmissions that suggest unauthorized negotiations with human outposts." Chen raised an eyebrow with perfect theatrical timing. "Unauthorized by whom, precisely?" "By..." Takar stopped, suddenly uncertain. The question struck at the heart of the current crisis. Who actually held authority over interspecies relations? In human diplomatic structure, Chen offered carefully, we found that clear chains of command prevented such ambiguities. Your own historical records suggest the Second Dynasty fell partly due to similar jurisdictional conflicts. The strategist's antennae went rigid. Chen had just connected their current crisis to one of the most catastrophic periods in Zarkax's history, without technically criticizing anyone. Through the crystalline walls, Chen could see groups of officers huddled in intense discussion. The military caste had begun stationing additional guards at sensitive junctions, citing security protocols that Chen had helped them improve. The diplomatic corps responded by installing their own monitoring systems, based on human oversight principles that Chen had carefully explained. In the central data core, automated systems began flagging unprecedented numbers of security violations as both sides attempted to access restricted information. The very security measures Chen had helped implement were now creating exactly the kind of bureaucratic gridlock he'd intended. High Commander Vexthra summoned Chen to his private chambers that evening. The supreme military leader's carapace showed signs of severe stress, its usual gleaming blue now muted and patchy. "General," he began, his translator set to its most formal frequencies, "your insights into human organizational principles have been illuminating, yet their implementation seems to have created unexpected complications." Chen bowed with precise humility. "Complex systems often interact in unexpected ways, Commander. Perhaps, like the great reformers of your 5th Dynasty, this presents an opportunity for positive change." Vexthra's antennae twitched with interest despite his obvious fatigue. Chen had just offered him a historical precedent for taking drastic action, one that would inevitably escalate the growing crisis. As he returned to his quarters, Chen noted how the guard patrols had subtly shifted, creating clear divisions between military and diplomatic sectors. The Zarkax's own dedication to protocol had become a weapon, as each side used regulations and procedures to obstruct the other. The perfect machine of their society was beginning to seize up, its gears grinding against each other in precisely the way Chen had engineered. Soon, the entire system would grind to a halt. The Citadel of Seven Moons trembled with suppressed tension. General Chen sat in his quarters, watching the perpetual storm outside intensify, as if reflecting the chaos within. The fortress's crystalline walls had begun displaying stress patterns, microscopic fractures caused by the conflicting energy signatures of hastily installed security systems. A priority alert chimed on his communication console. High Commander Vextra's image materialized, his once proud carapace now showing severe discoloration from prolonged stress. General, the commander's translator crackled with barely contained fury. The diplomatic corps has initiated a full security audit of all military operations. They cite human oversight protocols as precedent. Chen arranged his features into a mask of diplomatic concern. An unprecedented situation, Commander. Though perhaps not entirely unexpected, given recent developments. They demand access to classified battle plans, claiming evidence of unauthorized strategic initiatives. This is an outrage against all military tradition. Traditions must sometimes adapt, Chen observed carefully. Your own historical archives speak of similar conflicts during the Great Reformation. Though, as I recall, those who too rigidly clung to tradition often found themselves obsolete. Vextra's antennae went rigid. Chen had just subtly reminded him of how previous military leaders had lost power through inflexibility. The commander terminated the communication without the usual ceremonial phrases, a shocking breach of protocol that would soon become common knowledge. Within hours, the military caste responded by implementing new security measures based on what they called Advanced Human Defensive Doctrine. In reality, these were procedures Chen had carefully suggested over months of seemingly casual conversations. The measures effectively locked the diplomatic corps out of vital communication systems. The diplomatic corps retaliated immediately. Minister Tesora, her silver-white carapace now bearing the marks of emergency authority, issued a fortress-wide directive. Based on human principles of transparent governance, she announced over the public communication system, all military operations must now receive prior diplomatic approval. This protocol takes effect immediately. Chen watched from his balcony as the announcement sent shockwaves through the citadel. Military officers gathered in angry clusters, their carapaces darkening with rage. Diplomatic staff hurried through the corridors in tight groups, their antennae quivering with anxiety. The fortress's automated systems began registering thousands of security violations as both sides attempted to enforce contradictory protocols. Emergency lights flickered across the crystalline walls, creating dazzling patterns that would have been beautiful if they weren't symptoms of institutional collapse. Sub-Commander Kovor burst into Chen's quarters without requesting entry, another unprecedented breach of protocol. His carapace showed the deep blue patterns of military authority, newly applied and slightly asymmetrical in his haste. General, we've intercepted diplomatic transmissions to human outposts, he announced, mandibles clicking rapidly. They're attempting to negotiate directly, bypassing military oversight. A serious situation, Chen agreed solemnly. Though perhaps similar to how your military recently established direct communication channels with human defense installations. Kavor's antennae drooped as the implication hit home. Each side had been so focused on catching the other in acts of unauthorized communication that they'd failed to notice how their own actions appeared. Throughout the citadel, the chain of command was unraveling. Junior officers, caught between conflicting orders from military and diplomatic superiors, began invoking ancient honor codes to justify inaction. Administrative staff cited human organizational principles to question traditional authority structures. Chen's carefully planted ideas about checks and balances, transparency, and divided authority had taken root in the most fertile soil possible. The Zarkax's own obsession with proper procedure. Each side now wielded these concepts like weapons, not realizing they were dismantling their own society in the process. As night fell, the 7 moons aligned perfectly for the first time in a century. But the Zarkax were too consumed by their internal crisis to observe the traditional ceremonies. Their 1,000-year-old protocols, once the source of their strength, had become the instruments of their paralysis. The perfect machine was grinding to a halt, exactly as planned. Dawn broke over the citadel of 7 moons, its crystalline walls refracting light in chaotic patterns that matched the chaos within. General Chen stood at his balcony, watching the perpetual storms above part to reveal something new in orbit. The sleek silhouettes of human diplomatic vessels, their presence both a surprise and an inevitability. High Commander Vexfra's urgent summons arrived precisely as Chen had calculated. The commander's private chamber, once a model of military precision, now showed signs of disorder. Datapads lay scattered across surfaces, their displays flickering with contradictory reports and emergency notifications. "Your ships," Vexfra began, his translator failing to mask his agitation. "They approach under diplomatic protocols that we cannot verify, because our systems are deadlocked by internal security conflicts." Chen allowed himself a small smile. "An unfortunate timing, Commander, though perhaps not unexpected, given recent events." Before Vexfra could respond, Minister Tisora burst in, another breach of protocol that would have been unthinkable weeks ago. Her silver-white carapace bore the emergency markings of diplomatic authority. "The human fleet broadcasts offers of administrative assistance," she announced, antennae quivering. "They cite concerning reports about institutional instability within our command structure." "Reports?" Vexfra's carapace darkened dangerously. "What reports? Who authorized communication with human authorities?" Chen watched the two leaders face each other, their postures reflecting generations of institutional rivalry brought to a breaking point. The moment was perfect. "Perhaps," he suggested quietly, "we should consider how this situation appears from an external perspective." Both leaders turned to him, suddenly remembering his presence. Chen rose, allowing his carefully maintained pose of scholarly detachment to fall away like a shed cloak. "Your great society," he continued, each word precisely chosen, "stands at a crossroads. Your own historical archives speak of such moments, when rigid adherence to tradition must be balanced against necessary evolution." Through the chamber's crystalline walls, they could see the human ships taking up perfect diplomatic formation. Their positioning followed Zarkax's protocol exactly, a detail Chen had personally overseen in the mission planning, months before his capture. "You?" Vexfra's antennae went rigid as realization dawned. "This was your strategy all along." Chen bowed with exact ceremonial precision. "I am a general, Commander. My mission was to achieve victory, but victory need not mean destruction." Sora's color patterns shifted rapidly as she processed the implications. "The cultural insights, the organizational principles you shared, were genuine," Chen finished. "Their implementation, however, revealed structural weaknesses in your system that required addressing. Consider, would you prefer to address them under crisis or through careful reform?" A junior officer burst in, forgetting even basic entry protocols in his panic. Multiple diplomatic vessels requesting docking clearance, military systems locked by diplomatic override, diplomatic protocols frozen by military security, command structure non-responsive. Chen watched the perfect machine grind to its final halt. The Zarkax's own dedication to proper procedure had created a deadlock that only outside intervention could resolve. "Your empire stands at its moment of greatest potential," Chen offered softly. "You can cling to rigid traditions and watch your society fracture, or embrace evolution and emerge stronger. The choice, as always, remains yours." High Commander Vexfra and Minister Tisora exchanged looks, their antennae moving in unconscious synchronization for the first time in months. In that moment, they recognized the elegant trap they'd walked into. A trap made not of weapons or force, but of their own cultural machinery. You never needed to fire a shot, Vex 3 observed, his translator conveying something like reluctant admiration. The greatest victories, Chen replied, quoting ancient Zarkak's military doctrine, are those that transform enemies into allies. As the human ships began their docking procedures, Chen gazed out at the 7 moons hanging in perfect alignment. His mission had achieved far more than mere military victory. He had engineered the transformation of an entire civilization, using nothing but psychology, patience, and perfect understanding of their culture. The game was over. The real work of building something new could begin.